Before turning 30, Charlie Kirk had already built one of the most influential conservative organizations in America. To some, he's a brilliant young leader, a fresh voice challenging the status quo. To others, he's a symbol of division, fueling culture wars and controversy. But how does a teenager from suburban Illinois, armed with little more than determination, a sharp tongue and a vision, rise to become one of the youngest power brokers in American politics? Charlie Kirk was born on October 14, 1993, in the quiet suburbs of Arlington Heights, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. His father, Robert Kirk, worked as an architect, while his mother took on the role of raising the family. They lived what many would call a classic middle-class American life. Stable, comfortable, but not extravagant. The Kirk household was built on discipline, faith, and a strong sense of responsibility. From a young age, Charlie was deeply influenced by the Christian values his parents instilled in him. Sundays meant church, evenings often included family discussions about faith, and the idea of morality, hard work, and personal accountability were not just lessons but expectations. While most children in his neighborhood spent their time glued to cartoons or dreaming of sports stardom, Charlie's interests veered in a very different direction. He wasn't particularly athletic or drawn to pop culture. Instead, he developed a fascination with politics and history. He would spend hours reading about figures like Ronald Reagan, the Founding Fathers, and the principles of the U.S. Constitution. In middle school and high school, this interest only deepened. Teachers and classmates began to notice that Kirk was unusually confident when it came to debating issues. While others rolled their eyes at current events assignments, Charlie dove in head first, delivering arguments with the same intensity one might expect from a seasoned political commentator rather than a teenager. It was clear even then, Charlie Kirk wasn't interested in simply fitting in. He was already searching for something bigger, something that would eventually take him far beyond the suburbs of Chicago. In high school, Charlie Kirk began to stand out, not because of sports trophies or musical talent, but because of his voice. He had a natural ability to command attention when he spoke. Teachers noticed that whenever politics or history came up in class, Charlie was the first to raise his hand, not just to answer questions, but to challenge assumptions. By his junior year, he was writing op-eds for local newspapers, delivering fiery speeches at youth conferences, and even appearing on radio programs as a teenage commentator. His classmates sometimes saw him as intense, even stubborn, but no one could deny his relentless drive. At just 18, when most of his peers were filling out college applications, Charlie faced a crossroads. The traditional path, university, career, stability, was open to him. But Kirk felt called to something bigger. Instead of following the well-worn road, he took a leap of faith. He chose activism. Runt. That decision, risky and uncertain at the time, would change the entire course of his life. It was the moment he stepped away from being just another student and began building the foundation of what would soon become a nationwide movement. In 2012, when most young adults were still navigating freshman year, Charlie Kirk made a decision that would alter the course of his life and the political climate of America's campuses. With little more than determination, a $2,000 grant from a conservative donor, and a bold vision, he founded Turning Point USA. At the time, the idea seemed almost impossible. Universities were widely seen as strongholds of progressive thought. Conservative students often felt outnumbered, silenced, or hesitant to speak up. Kirk saw an opening, a battlefield of ideas where he could plant a flag. His mission was simple yet ambitious: to build a grassroots network that would spread the message of limited government, free markets, and individual liberty to every corner of America's colleges. He started small. Early Turning Point events drew only a handful of students, sometimes no more than a dozen people sitting in a classroom after hours. With no flashy headquarters, no large staff, and little funding, Kirk relied on his energy and charisma. He traveled from campus to campus, often driving long hours, speaking to anyone who would listen. He handed out flyers, recruited chapter leaders, and built a movement one handshake at a time. What seemed like a modest student project was in fact the birth of a political machine. Kirk wasn't just founding an organization, he was laying the groundwork for a youth movement that within a decade would become one of the most influential forces in American conservatism. It wasn't easy. In those early days, Charlie Kirk faced an uphill battle at nearly every turn. Many conservative leaders dismissed him as too young and too inexperienced, doubting that a teenager could build a serious political movement. Liberal students mocked his message, labeling him outdated or out of touch. At some campuses, he was shouted down, ridiculed, even banned from speaking altogether. Yet, instead of discouraging him, the opposition seemed to harden his resolve. Kirk learned quickly that if he wanted to be heard, he had to speak with clarity and fire. He avoided political jargon, choosing instead to speak in plain, sharp language that resonated with students who already felt overlooked. He talked about debt, taxes, government overreach, issues that young conservatives believed directly affected their lives but rarely heard voiced on campus. Slowly, the momentum began to build. A handful of curious students turned into dozens. Dozens became hundreds, and with each new campus chapter that formed, Turning Point USA expanded its reach. Kirk had found his battlefield. It wasn't Washington, D.C. or the halls of Congress. It was the American university. And in this war of ideas, he would fight not with policy papers or long speeches, but with soundbites, debates, and an unshakable presence that made him impossible to ignore. Within just a few short years, the modest beginnings of Turning Point USA had transformed into something far greater than anyone expected. What had once been Charlie Kirk speaking to a half-empty classroom now turned into massive student summits, with arenas filled by thousands of young conservatives waving American flags, chanting slogans, and cheering as if they were at a rock concert rather than a political rally. By 2015, Turning Point boasted chapters on hundreds of campuses nationwide, each run by students energized by the promise of giving conservatives a voice where they felt silenced. These summits became spectacles of conservative youth culture, complete with celebrity speakers, fireworks, light shows, and bold declarations that a new generation was ready to fight back. At the center of it all was Charlie Kirk, no longer the teenager with a small budget and a handful of flyers. He had become the face of a movement. His sharp one-liners and fiery debates made him a natural fit for television. Soon, he was a regular guest on Fox News, sparring with liberal commentators and presenting himself as the unapologetic voice of America's youth. But television was just one weapon in his arsenal. Kirk understood the power of the internet better than most political figures of his time. On Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, he built a loyal following of millions, mastering the art of the viral post. Short, punchy statements, often controversial, spread like wildfire, turning Kirk into both a champion for conservatives and a lightning rod for critics. Turning Point USA was no longer just a student organization. It was a political juggernaut, a machine that blended grassroots activism with media spectacle. And at the center of that machine stood Charlie Kirk, a young man who had gone from being dismissed as too small to matter to a figure who could rally thousands with a single tweet. By his mid-20s, Charlie Kirk's rise had accelerated beyond even his own expectations. What started as a youth organization on college campuses had pushed him into the inner circles of American politics. No longer just a student activist, Kirk was suddenly rubbing shoulders with senators, governors, and some of the most powerful figures in Washington. But it was his relationship with Donald Trump that truly propelled him into the national spotlight. Kirk became one of the earliest and loudest youth voices to champion Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. While many in the Republican establishment hesitated, Charlie seized the opportunity. He saw in Trump a disruptive outsider who, like himself, thrived on breaking norms and challenging the elite. His gamble paid off. After Trump's victory, Kirk was invited into the orbit of the White House, attending events, policy discussions, and private meetings where strategy was shaped. Photos emerged of the young activist shaking hands with the president, speaking at rallies, and being acknowledged as a key voice for the next generation of conservatives. For his supporters, it was a stunning validation, a 20-something college dropout who had climbed into the heart of power. For his critics, it was troubling proof that he had become more than an activist. He was now a political power broker, someone who could influence not just student debates, but national policy. By the time he reached his mid-20s, Charlie Kirk was no longer simply leading Turning Point USA. He had become a trusted ally of the President of the United States, one of the youngest in modern history to hold such influence. And with that closeness to Trump came a new level of visibility, opportunity, and controversy that would define the next chapter of his career. Charlie Kirk's rise wasn't confined to campus auditoriums or Fox News studios. It thrived online. On Twitter, Instagram, and later through his own podcast, Kirk became a polarizing digital presence. His posts were sharp, often provocative, and designed to cut straight to the heart of America's most heated cultural debates. For his supporters, Kirk's blunt style was refreshing. They saw him as a fearless warrior for free speech, a young leader unafraid to challenge political correctness or to stand against what he called the radical left. In their eyes, he was saying the things others were too afraid to voice. Every viral tweet, every fiery podcast episode reinforced his image as a defender of conservative values in a hostile culture. But for his critics, the very same tactics looked dangerous. To them, Kirk wasn't fostering honest debate, he was stoking division. They accused him of oversimplifying complex issues, spreading misinformation, and exploiting America's cultural flashpoints for personal power. On college campuses and across social media, his name became a lightning rod, sparking protests, debates, and endless arguments online. Supporters praised him as a truth-teller, opponents branded him a provocateur. And as the culture wars deepened in America, Charlie Kirk positioned himself right at the center, drawing both admiration and outrage in equal measure. Love him or hate him, there is no denying that Charlie Kirk has left a mark on American politics. In less than a decade, he reshaped the political landscape for an entire generation of young conservatives. What began as a one-man crusade with a folding table and a stack of pamphlets evolved into Turning Point USA, a nationwide powerhouse with chapters on hundreds of campuses, multi-million-dollar funding, and the ability to mobilize thousands of students almost overnight. Kirk's influence reaches far beyond the classroom. His message, sharp, unapologetic, and often controversial, echoes across lecture halls, late-night television debates, and the endless scroll of Twitter feeds. He transformed conservative activism into a youth-driven spectacle, blending politics with the energy of pop culture and creating an environment where college rallies felt more like rock concerts than policy seminars. Supporters credit him with giving conservatives a voice in spaces where they felt silenced. Critics argue he has deepened America's divisions by thriving on conflict, but either way, his strategy worked. He turned the American university, a place once seen as unreachable for conservative ideas, into his primary battlefield, and in doing so forced both the right and the left to pay attention. Today, Charlie Kirk stands not just as the founder of a student group, but as a national figure whose reach extends from campus quads to the halls of power in Washington. His legacy is already being written in the stories of the students he's inspired, and in the cultural battles he has chosen to fight. As the Republican Party continues to evolve in the 21st century, one thing is clear: Charlie Kirk isn't standing on the sidelines, watching history unfold. He's in the arena, actively shaping it. From campus halls to the corridors of power, Kirk has worked to position himself as more than an activist. He has become a strategist, a messenger, and at times a gatekeeper for the next generation of conservatives. His fingerprints can be seen on the party's growing emphasis on culture wars, free speech battles, and youth mobilization. In many ways, Kirk represents the GOP's future. He speaks the language of social media, understands the pulse of younger voters, and has built a digital-first model of political influence that rivals traditional institutions. While party elders rely on decades of policy experience, Kirk wields memes, viral videos, and rallies packed with college students, showing that the battlefield of ideas is no longer fought only in Washington, it's fought online, in classrooms, and on TikTok feeds. To his critics, this is cause for concern, a sign that politics has become more about provocation than principle. To his supporters, it's a revolution proof that conservative values can thrive even in the spaces once thought impossible to reach. Rawns. But no matter where one stands, the reality is undeniable. Charlie Kirk is not simply reacting to the changing tides of the Republican Party, he is steering them, helping define what the movement will look like for years to come. In shaping the politics of tomorrow, he has already secured his place as one of the most influential and polarizing figures of his generation. In the end, Charlie Kirk's story is one of ambition, controversy, and undeniable influence. What began with a teenager's dream in the suburbs of Chicago grew into a political career that placed him at the very center of America's most heated debates. His path has been anything but ordinary. At an age when most young people were still searching for direction, Kirk had already chosen his battlefield, the American university. With little more than determination, a borrowed desk, and a message that cut against the grain, he built a movement that turned campus politics into a national story. But ambition alone did not define him. Kirk's rise has been marked by fierce controversy. To his supporters, he is a symbol of courage, someone unafraid to challenge powerful institutions and give a voice to conservatives who felt ignored. To his detractors, he is a lightning rod, accused of stoking division and exploiting culture wars for influence. And yet, whether praised or condemned, one truth remains: Charlie Kirk has shaped conversations that reach far beyond classrooms or rallies. He has forced America to confront uncomfortable questions about free speech, youth politics, and the very future of its democracy. From a high school student with a dream to a political heavyweight with the ear of a president, Charlie Kirk's journey proves how one voice, unyielding, relentless, and unapologetically bold, can change the conversation of a nation. If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of today's most influential figures.